everybody, welcome back. If you're new here, hi, I'm Mercury. So today it is a book review, summary of the books that I read in 2023. So I have been a busy, avid reader this year. Every year I set a book goal for myself, and I do this on Goodreads, and I do that not only to help motivate me and keep track of how much I'm reading, but it's also a great way to find out other books that I like to read. I follow my friends, I follow celebrities who are into sort of similar interests as me. For example, Will Wheaton is one of the celebrities I follow. So you can get great ideas for books that you want to read, and you can set up a want to read book list. So I use Goodreads to keep track of my book progress all the time. They also have what's called a reading challenge. So the reading challenge, you set for yourself a goal of how many books you would like to read that year, and it will keep track for you. And if you're reading a paper book, you manually have to update that you're reading it. But if you're reading on an e-reader, it is smart like that, and it will figure out what you're reading and when the book is done, and it'll literally just update your progress for you, which is awesome. So that's what I do to keep track of all my books. Now, in the past few years, I usually set a goal of 10 to 12 books for myself. Some years I do better than others. Some years I do not hit my goal, and that's okay. Some years I exceed my goal, and that's okay. And some years I just hit my goal. It's always different. I aim to read a book a month. If I'm doing that, I'm sort of on pace for my goals. I did better than that this year. This year, my goal was 12 books. I read 16. I read 16 books this year. Yes! I think that's actually outside of time that I was in school, a personal record for myself for how many books I read this year. And of those books, I think, I'm just double checking, I think only one of them was an audiobook. Double checking. Yes, of those 16 books, only one of them was an audiobook. That's it. I sat and I read 15 books and listened to one book. And that's awesome. That being said, I want to give you a rundown of what I read this year, and I want to talk a little bit about some of the ones that really stood out to me, some of the ones that were my highlights for this year. These are the books that I read in the order that I read them. There is no rhyme or reason other than this is chronologically the way I read them, January through December of 2023. And if I'm looking off to the side, I have my Kindle, my Goodreads. So I'm just, this is where I'm keeping track of everything. It's my organization of my books. Book 1, The Wastelands by Stephen King. It's part of the Dark Tower series. Book 2, and this was the audiobook, Life by Keith Richards. And the reason why I wanted this one as an audiobook, it is in part narrated by Johnny Depp. Book 3, My Best Friend's Exorcism, and that is by Grady Hendrix. The next book I read also is by Grady Hendrix, and that was just happenstance. It was the library hold came up, and it just happened to be back to back like that. And this one was We Sold Our Souls. The next book I read was Clown Girl by Monica Drake. Then I read Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. Then Turn of the Screw by Henry James. Then I read In the Hand of Dante by Nick, I'm going to mispronounce this last name, Tosches. He's a Russian author. I'm sure I'm mispronouncing his name, and I apologize for that. I've not heard it out loud, and I'm trying to phonetically sound it out. Next, I read Tell All by Chuck Palahniuk. Then I read The Immortal Circus by A.R. Kahler. Then Flowers of Evil. This is another name I'm probably going to mess up because I'm trying to do it phonetically. Charles Baudelaire. Then I read American Psycho by Bret, Easton, Ellis. Then I read Caraval by Stephanie Garber. Then Devotion by Patti Smith. Then I read The Big Reveal, an illustrated manifesto of drag by Sasha Velour. And I just finished out the year with The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle by Stuart Turton, Turton. So that is the book list that I completed this year. So, of all of those books, Mercury, what was your favorite? My friends, it's too hard. I can't pick one. I will give you some highlights. Stephen King's The Wastelands. It's classic Stephen King. It's part of that Dark Tower series, and I'm sort of invested in it. So at this point, I'm going to continue reading through it because I want to see how it ends. They are characters you sort of become very attached to, and you want to find out what happens to them. But it wasn't a huge standout book from my list. Like, in 3 years, would I be able to differentiate that book from another Stephen King book or a Dark Tower book in the saga? I don't know. Ask me again in a few years. Yeah. Life by Keith Richards. So I adored this book in a way that, like, there was a line in the book that I'm trying to, like, incorporate into my vernacular. I may have talked about this in an earlier video. I may have done an actual book review on this. But there was a part where Keith Richards was describing, like, a chicken pot pie that was, like, delivered backstage, and one of the stage crew got to it before he did and, like, cut into it and punctured the crust of it, and he, like, totally lost his cool. He totally went off the rails with this, and, like, the level of anger just for the insignificance of what happened was just, like, totally disproportionate. And his response was, "Don't bust my crust, man." So, like, that is now, like, this line that I'm trying to incorporate into my vernacular when something, like, really insignificant really, really irks you. It's like, don't bust my crust. So if that ever slips out, it's a Keith Richards life reference that I just, that stuck with me. So much so that it's carrying on into my speech patterns, apparently. My best friend's Exorcism was entertaining. It was a good read. It was a fast read, but I don't know that it's like this I'm gonna carry with me forever kind of a story. It's like, it's fun. It's definitely a fun story. I'm glad I read it. I discovered that I really enjoy Grady Hendrix after reading that book. So that was great. If I were to compare that to the one I read right after, We Sold Our Souls, I think I liked We Sold Our Souls better, more because topically I was a bit more interested. It revolved around rock and roll groupies, basically, like fans of a band and an ex-band member, and, you know, a lot of animosities that they were trying to overcome, and, you know, healing friendships, and a lot of those type of themes with this sort of, like, supernatural overlay to it. It was pretty interesting. So if I had to pick between the two Grady Hendrix books, I would pick We Sold Our Souls. The next one was Clown Girl. I absolutely loved reading Clown Girl. This was one of my favorites this year. This is one that, like, I will carry with me, and it can live rent-free in my brain. It's totally okay with me. Clown Girl was this story of basically, like, Murphy's Law. Like, if anything can go wrong, it will go wrong at the worst possible moment. Yeah, that was what was happening to this girl who, she made her living as a clown, which is where the name Clown Girl came from. But it was like this series of unfortunate events and misunderstandings, and it just led to so much misfortune. But there was a thoughtfulness and a lightheartedness about some of it, and it was written in such a relatable way. Like, you're reading this and you're like, this I can totally see her perspective, and I can totally see from the outside looking in, like, why this doesn't make much sense and, you know, why it looks like she's falling apart. But from her perspective, this was just a series of unfortunate happenstance, and she really didn't cause a lot of it, but she could have caused some of it. It's interesting and written in just such a way that, like, you instantly, or at least I did, connect to that character and, like, you know, you're part of that world. And that is like, when a book can do that to me, when I am in the world of the book right from the beginning, that's a good one for me. So Clown Girl, definitely top in my list. Fahrenheit 451, I mean, it's classic. It's classic for a reason. It's one of those books that everyone should probably read at some point. It's commentary on humanity and society, and interesting how it was written so many years ago and it's still highly relevant today. Turn of the Screw. It's a horror novel. It's if you watched any of the series, I was gonna say movies, any of the series about Bly Manor, this is the book that those Bly Manor series were based upon. So it's like haunting, ghosty, paranormal horror novel. It was pretty good. For me, sometimes when I see the show or the movie first and then I read the book, it's hard for me to pull apart what was the show and what was the book because they start incorporating into each other in my brain. So it's hard for me to say, oh, this happened in the book, but it actually might have happened in the show. So I'm not going to do that because I can't tease it apart right now. Interestingly enough, if I do it the other way around, if I read the book first, that doesn't happen. So I generally always try to read the book first because I can keep them separate. In the Hand of Dante, this one was very interesting. I do put a disclaimer. It did have some language in it that can be pretty offensive language. But in context for the time period, you know, it had a purpose. But because of that, you know, can be triggering, difficult to read, etc., etc. But the story of it was like, they were trying to get this like manuscript, this handwritten piece of, I don't remember if it was Dante's Inferno or Paradiso, but it was like part of the trilogy, right? And according to the book, I don't know if this is factually true, there's no record in Dante's own hand of when he wrote the Divine Trilogy. And in this book, they located it, and it was sort of like a heist, right? They were trying to get this handwritten, you know, piece of history, so to say, of Dante's writing of the Divine Trilogy. And that's what it's about. But there are a lot of like time jumps, location jumps, character jumps with no explanation. And you have to really be on point with when you're reading it. Like, it's not a book to read when you're drowsy, because then it's hard to sort of keep up with all the changes. Like, the way I'm looking around is the way I felt reading it sometimes, because it would just sort of hop around a little bit. But it was very, very well written. Tell All. I mean, I love books by Chuck. He does great work. Again, he's another one that tends to use pretty racy language, stuff that's not for everybody and can be triggering to some people. Tell All was interesting, and I think I did a standalone book review on Tell All, or at least mentioned it, because one of the things that stood out to me about that book was this aspect of it where this celebrity who's had a lot of like plastic surgery over the years, because this was like, you know, an aging celebrity who's like trying to like stay relevant and, you know, all of that. She would look in a mirror and have all of her imperfections etched into the mirror before she would have them quote unquote corrected. Because I say quote unquote because I think people are great how they are, you know, but if it made her happy, she went with it. But this concept of permanently etching in the mirror that you could still see, you could still stand and look at and still come back to seeing who you would have been, it hit in like a very, very unique way. But books by Chuck Palahniuk, always good. Immortal Circus. This was another one that was like really entertaining, really a fun read. Interesting and unexpected twists in it. It's one of those like young adult novels that I feel like is good for adults if you have interest in the topic. So that's why I say it's like easy to get through. But at the same time, it was like a very engaging story and I really liked it. Flowers of Evil is one of those books that like, I'm glad I read it, but was not my favorite. It's poetry. It's poetry. And the thing with poetry for me versus reading a novel, I like the idea with a novel, creating a world, creating a universe for you to be in. And I don't get that with poetry. I can read like short verse poetry without a problem. I can read long verse poetry where it creates that story. Leaves of Grass, perfect example of that. I love Walt Whitman, one of my favorite poets. But for me, Flowers of Evil was just not, I wasn't connecting to it. And that's okay. It's totally okay. American Psycho, another horror novel. Very, very hard to read. Very, I don't know, just, if you saw the movie, imagine this, like, it's all in words. The movie, you could close your eyes, you could look away. You can't do that when you're reading a book and you have to guess where you could skip the paragraph and it doesn't always work. And it was hard to read because it was it was gruesome. It was hard. Yeah. Caraval or Caraval. This is another one of my favorites from this year. I absolutely love this. This was another one right from the beginning into the universe of the book. This was fantastic. I loved it so much, and it's a series. So there's more. There's more. I'm definitely going to read the second book, Legend, this year. That is on my to-read list. This one, yeah, I 5 stars from me for this one. I absolutely loved Caraval. Devotion, Patti Smith. I really liked it. I really, really liked it. And I love Patti Smith. I love her. She's just one of these like down-to-earth people, and she just puts what's on her mind in the page. And she did it here. She did it here. The Big Reveal by Sasha Velour was sort of combination of the history of drag combined with her experience as a drag queen. So it's a biography, or autobiography, I should say. Sasha Velour was on RuPaul's Drag Race, so it's somebody you might be familiar with. But yeah, it was a great education on the history of drag by reading this. Then lastly, The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle. I just finished this one, and this one also has made it to my top list. It was like a whodunit kind of a mystery, where the lead character woke up every day in like a different person and had to figure out like who went after Evelyn Hardcastle, and putting the clues together and like watching them unfold. And then like when you get to the end, you're like, oh, that little thing from the beginning, or that thing, like don't forget about this piece. And yeah, when I'm reading this, I was like, the author must have had like a huge whiteboard with like strings, like yarn all over the place, like trying to keep all these facts like in order and like where they would be revealed and untangled, and not to reveal too soon, but making sure you plant the seed of it there. It was so clever. It was so clever. I really enjoyed that run. Really, really did. So those were my my books this year in 2023. So, I guess with that, I mean, I picked my top 3. So the top 3, Clown Girl, Caraval, 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle. Those would definitely be my top 3. Just under that is Life by Keith Richards. Gotta squeeze that in there. But yeah, those were definitely my top picks of 2023. So I hope everyone out there also had some good reads this year. Let me know what you've been reading. Let me know if there's anything I should try to add to my list for 2024. If there's any standout kind of books. You could probably tell from like my list, there's not like a specific genre that I gravitate towards. It's more, can you get me into that world? And, you know, those top 3 books that I mentioned, they did it. They did it, and right off the bat, they did it. So let me know who some of your favorite authors are, what books you've been reading this year. If you're not a reader, if you're like visual stories, if you had some great movies, any top picks for this year, let me know what your favorite things from this year were. And I guess with that, I'm done for the day. I'll see you all real soon. And until then, stay inspired by everyone. Take care.